Welcome back, everyone. Back to the Preaching Collective, our last edition, I guess, however we want to call it. Sort of
previously on the Preaching Collective.
Last part of Esther, looking at chapters 8, 9, and 10. I don't know about you all, but I mean, this has been really good. It's been fun to go through this with you guys and the different things that have come out. It's a reminder of how the Bible works. I mean, there's stuff you guys pointed out. I'm like, oh, I've not seen that before. And so it's been really good to sort of study this together with you guys, and a lot of useful things I think already for how we're going to preach and teach this. But sort of what's happened previously, as we talked about the great reversal, all the things that we thought were going to come upon the Jews, or at least Haman thought were going to come upon the Jews, instead it came upon his head. And so we ended with Haman being hung on the gallows that he had built to hang Mordecai. And it seems like Esther, Esther hasn't actually quite saved her people entirely yet. Right?
Not yet.
And so Haman, the architect of the order that was going to massacre the Jewish people, he's gone. But now there's the situation of the people, and that's where we begin chapter 8. Mm-hmm. And so, in many ways, this is sort of the reversal of now the situation that the Jewish people were in, right? And so we saw a reversal in terms of Haman and what he thought he was doing, but now, remember, the Jewish people, they're still in fasting and sackcloth and ashes, right?
Well, all this is happening.
Yeah, all this is happening.
It's like you watching the movie and you're like, man, yes. And it's like you start clapping too. You're like, hold on, wait. Like they still got sackcloth. Like that, the order ain't
exactly. So that's the order that was given can't be rescinded, right? It's out there.
Right.
And so Esther, she falls at the king's feet, verse 3, weeps and pleads with him to avert the evil plan of Haman the Agagite and the plot that he had devised against the Jews. And so what the king does is, and here's the amazing thing here now, the power that was in Haman's hand is now given to Mordecai. Mordecai is called in and says, first of all, he says to Esther, look, you can write an order. Well, Esther asks, can you write something that can help us, basically?
It's like she did the thing again. Like there's still that rule that you can't go to the king without being summoned. And she does it again, and he extends to her the scepter to make sure she doesn't get killed.
But she's like, I got him now.
No, that's facts, because like I think Haman's property. So he takes Haman's property and gives it to Mordecai, and so
Esther does
gives
that.
it to Esther.
To Esther.
Yep.
And then Esther says, "Hey, Mordecai, you be in charge of it." But again, that's
crazy.
I like here though that she doesn't get lost in the privilege. Or I got all this property now. She still goes, but that order, that edict is still out there.
Yeah.
And so she goes and now there isn't this timidity like we might have thought before.
Sorry, I was making her.
It's just like, no, it's just legit.
Yeah.
But this time it's like, no, this has to, like, there's still more work to be done.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's something to say is like sometimes you feel like you've won a battle. It's like, yes, but there's still more.
Yeah.
And so let's just make sure it's like all the way complete.
But I wonder if that's something that also like encouraged her, because she started seeing these things. And it's like when you get to a place with God and you start seeing like, okay, well, he made a way here, he made a way here, he made a way here. Then it's like you have a little bit more like, okay, well, I seen God do it, so I might as well put my neck out there again. Yeah. Because I know he's going to come through.
Yeah.
Trust in God's faithfulness and his character.
Yeah.
So Mordecai is able to... right here. Just verse 7. So King Xerxes said to Queen Esther and to Mordecai the Jew, I've given Esther the house of Haman. Verse 8, but you may write as you please with regard to the Jews in the name of the king. Seal it with the king's ring. For an edict written in the name of the king and sealed with the king's ring cannot be revoked. And so the previous one can't be revoked, but we can at least write something that can give you guys a fighting chance. That's basically what's said here, right? And so edict is written, and Mordecai is the one behind this that says the Jews can defend themselves, right? They can gather arms, and they can defend themselves against all those who would attack them, right, and who would try to take their plunder. And so that's sent out throughout the empire. And what I love about this, so this is verse 15. So Mordecai now in the presence of the king, he goes out, and verse 16, the Jews had light and gladness and joy and honor in every province and every city wherever the king's command and his edict reached. There was gladness and joy among the Jews, a feast and a holiday, and many from the peoples of the country that declared themselves Jews. They all came out now.
I'm Jewish.
I got some on my mother's side.
Right? I got Indians in my family. Yes.
For fear the Jews had fallen them.
5%. I'm in there.
Keeping with the reversal theme. I mean, I mean, think about this. They went from and you just I mean, it's very the literary nature of this. I think is really
that's good
to bring out. That these things are written in an intentional way. And so we began the book of Esther hiding the fact that they were Jews, right? Don't tell anyone, hide it.
Oh, that's a great.
Keeping it down low.
That's a great.
And now God has set it up where people want to tell everyone, hey, I'm a Jew, right?
That's crazy.
And the situation is presented where they're willing to do that. Now, there's still danger here, right?
Yeah.
So, you're saying you're a Jew knowing that you could potentially be attacked, but there's now the conditions are created where they know that they have an advocate before the king, right?
That's facts.
With Mordecai, and they had the ability to defend themselves against all enemies, which, let's get allegorical here, right? Yeah. So, that sense of we have Jesus, an advocate for us before the king. Mm-hmm. Yeah. We have ways of defending ourselves against those who would attack us as Christians. I think there's certainly there's good imagery there for us to think about as we think of how we are today in similar situations.
Mm-hmm. One thing I've noticed about just like throughout the entire narrative is this idea of like there is a respect for the law, specifically Persian law. But like if you notice, like a lot of times there's like, well, this is what the law says. This is what the law says. This is what the law says. There's just like we got to follow the law, if you will, Persian law again. So it's interesting, the idea that there's this law here and not even the king is able to revoke it. Yeah. But now we have to make a new law so Jews can defend themselves, as you said, Ramon. I just think it's interesting, like this idea of like their concern for like the law, even all throughout, even in Esther, even from Esther in the earlier chapters.
Yeah, it's
interesting.
Although I find myself having, I don't know, I'm not liking the way the Persian law works, right?
Right, for sure. For sure.
That an edict can be sent out to annihilate people with no one blinking. That this is sort of allows me to sort of redress that in a system that I think is already. Certainly in this, I mean, we're seeing the echoes of what any human systems always have, right? Yeah. Which people can be overlooked, ignored, taking advantage of, and the requirement for an advocate for intervention at various times to redress those things, right? The system doesn't. This is a system that doesn't necessarily protect this from happening again, right? I don't know all Persian history, but certainly it's just a reminder, though, again, of wherever God's people find themselves. His fingerprints are there. Yeah. There. And this is, looking at a sort of bigger biblical picture. I mean, this is God promising to preserve his people. Yeah. Right?
Yes. Yes.
And here they are in a powerful king, empire. Beginning the book, everyone's against him. Yeah. And God's stepping in to make sure his people are preserved.
I was going to say, as you read that last part, I had circled it when they were talking about they became Jews and like all of them kind of like, yeah, I'm a Jew. And so when I was reading this, it kind of like echoed like all of the times that the Jews and the children of Israel in battle when they saw God like would deliver his people, fear would often come on those who are around them. So it's like, okay, even though God is Rahab, and it's like, even though God is not mentioned, but there's something to be said about the people saying like, oh, wait a minute, we don't want to mess with these folks. Okay, actually, I'm one of them. Okay, it's like, let me just slide in the crowd because they know that there's something and someone at work behind these people who will cause them to like overcome every single time.
Yeah, I love when to talk about it as literature and say like, no, these books have authors.
Yeah,
and to say like, no, I think that's what's great about understanding it in terms of God's fingerprints. You could look around a room, and go like, oh, I can see your fingerprints on this. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like you can look. Yeah. You could look at somebody's office and be like, oh, I see your fingerprints all over this.
Yeah.
And so I love, Vermont, when you say that and you talk about this literary, you can't separate the author from his literature, and to go, regardless of how people understand the story, when you read it, you go, somebody wrote this story with intention, you know, and it's
genius.
That's what I'm saying. It's such a significant idea to talk about, like, when you have Vashti in the beginning and Esther becomes like, hey, let's put your name in the hat. It's like, but don't tell them who you are, otherwise, or harm could come to us. It's just crazy about how, like, you see it just kind of turn, and it looks like it's getting worse and worse and worse and worse and worse, and then it hits like a pit, you know, and then in a night, it's like, again, draw forward.
Another one I'm thinking of there is how in the beginning of the book, there's great distance between the Jews and power and the king, and in fact, you know, Esther is brought into the palace, but you know, when she really shows it back up in the story, she admits, like, I haven't seen a king in 30 days, right? And so it's just sort of this gap, right, between the Jews are on their own, and now we see, like, intimacy, like she's there, right, with the king, talking to him about stuff, right? And
writing on behalf of him now.
Yeah, and writing on behalf of them, exactly.
Like new laws and
so she's given a position by which then she could advocate for the people.
Right.
So then in chapter 9, and the verse says what we've been saying. Now in the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, on the 13th day of the same, when the king's command and edict were about to be carried out, on the very day when the enemy of the Jews hoped to gain the mastery over them, the reverse occurred. The Jews gained mastery over those who hated them. And it says no one can stand against them, right? And you know, what's interesting here is that I have to look at this more, but I've been thinking, so I guess people still came out to try to get the Jews in this, and they fought them. I mean, or are we saying? I don't think is it text suggesting the Jews went out and hunted people who were against them.
It sounds like
feels a little more problematic, but I mean, you know, we should sort of see what the text says.
It sounded like the two laws, because you can't rescind the other one.
Yeah.
So the people who had prepared to attack the Jews based on Haman's law,
they still went ahead with it.
The purge,
because it was still a law, so people could still try. And then now here's a new law that said, well, the Jews can defend themselves. But in this case, where others thought that the government was going to be on their side, supporting them, they realized, like, no, now Mordecai, who wrote how the Jews can defend themselves, he's the one who's in control, and he's now the authority over all the government officials to help the Jews defend themselves against those who would attack them. And it's now the thing that was so interesting in chapter 9. Haman's law was written such that people could prepare, then attack, and then plunder. Yeah. So it was like you can do this, then you can attack them, you can take all their stuff.
Get rich off of them.
But Mordecai, like, essentially wrote the law in reverse, and they could have, right? So remember when the Egyptians left? I mean, when the Israelites left Egypt and they could plunder their property. Yeah. This is different in the fact that when Mordecai wrote this law, they defended themselves, but it kept saying, but they did not take their property.
Even though they could. I think
even though they probably could have. Yeah.
It says that. Yeah.
But that rings with a different kind of integrity and grace, and, like, there's a level of, like, we can defend ourselves and you won't stand against us, but we're not going to go so far as to, like, plunder and take your property, you know?
Yeah, that's an interesting observation. That's good.
And there's a rhythm to that, which I was like, okay, yeah, but they did not confiscate their property.
I mean, it shows like they just defending themselves. Like their motives was just to live. I just want to live. You know?
Yeah. Can I live?
Right?
So that goes out throughout the capital. It goes throughout the provinces. They're able to defend themselves, to stand up for their rights. And again, I find myself thinking, I guess, wow, people, really still went out and attacked them and hoped that they could eliminate them, but it doesn't work out. And, I would say too, though, we should see the miraculous providence and power of the Lord. That I think the Bible always makes a point of emphasizing that it's not like the Jews were like these mighty people, they're all like special force warriors, right? I mean, that I think we should see, like, the reality is that, who knows how many people they're in the midst of a foreign empire. They probably were outnumbered, even with their ability to defend themselves. I want to suggest that God's protection of them, even here, a reminder, and this happens over and over, where the Jews are able to be successful even in circumstances where you think, it might not work out. I mean, even the ability to defend themselves doesn't guarantee that they would be okay.
Right, that they won't be harmed, that there won't be casualties and stuff like that. Yeah. There was an interesting, and it just caught my eye whenever they rewrote this law. That when they talked about the degree to which, like, how widespread the law was, in the Net Bible, I'm not sure how it translates in others, but it said from India to Ethiopia.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that's just when you think about, like,
Where's that at?
It's in. I'm trying to exactly find the verse because I was just reading it and I was like, "Whoa, what? Like, really?"
I think verse 9.
Verse 9:9.
Not 8:9.
8:9. Okay.
Rewind a little.
Okay, good. Yeah. So, so they wrote out everything that
yeah.
Mordecai instructed to the Jews and to the satraps and the governors and the officials of the provinces, all the way from India
So this
to
is a huge
Ethiopia.
empire. Yeah.
Well, if you remember back,
Well, it's not even.
if you remember back in chapter 1, this is the vastness of King Xerxes' kingdom. It repeats that.
True, but
as well.
here's the interesting thing to me: 127 provinces in all. To each province in its own script. They didn't all speak this. They didn't all write the same. And to each people in their own language, and to the Jews according to their own script and their own language. So it sounds like every tribe, tongue, nation, people, language. It sounds a little bit like that.
Right. Get rid of them.
And if you think about the countries from India to Ethiopia, when you think about, like, even imagery, which I think is important sometimes, you go, the Jews are spread out all across that.
Yeah.
So when you think through, like, the nature and the dynamic and the human flow of all that, and you go, what do those people look like? To just the inclusion of it, right? And so, and I only say that because it is important, because when you start creating art and media and whatever, and you try to think, like, the actual history and flow and movement of God's people, it isn't a thing where it's like, oh, recently it got here, maybe, like, because of Acts 8 and the Ethiopian Union. That's when it's like, nah, this is BC. Like, it's been spread out and widespread, and the language and the writing has been widespread for a long time. And again, they've been marrying, and that's been happening
For sure.
And then here's an indication where it's like, look, it's everywhere. So it really is. So then when you get to Revelation, and you go, he ransomed from himself people from every tribe and language and people and tongue. You go, oh, it's always been there.
Yeah.
It's always been there.
Yeah. It's always been a plan of God, even dating back all the way from Genesis 12, 1-3, right?
Yeah, I'm just, again,
We're seeing the echo of that here.
Yeah. Just the language of that again. And for people who, we're in a period where people are deconstructing, and is it this, is it that, is it this, is it that? It's like, this is another indication to say, like, nah, it's been every people, it's been widespread, it's been in places that people haven't typically talked about it being from. Inspirations and sources and all of that. You go, nah, they're God's people have been there,
Yep.
So, in keeping with that, I mean, here God is rescuing his people, drawing a people to himself, saving a people to himself throughout the empire, all these different provinces. Yeah. When God does that, there's celebration, right?
Yes.
Even as we look forward to a marriage supper of the Lamb, I think the Feast of Purim is an early foretaste of that for God's people. So it's interesting that this becomes a holiday for them.
How many feasts they had in this?
I know.
I mean, bro, like
any opportunity. So verse 20, Mordecai records these things, sends letters to all the Jews who are in all the provinces of King Xerxes, both near and far, obligating them to keep the 14th day of the month Adar and also the 15th day of the same year by year, as the days on which the Jews got relief from their enemies, and as the month that had been turned for them from sorrow unto gladness, from mourning into holiday, that she should make them days of feasting and gladness, days for sending gifts of food to one another and gifts to the poor. Which, again, God's heart for those in the margins and poor, yet again. But here's a day where, like, they're consciously celebrating, and I love it. It's a full picture. They celebrate the fact that they recognize that we remember we were in mourning and sorrow under threat, and this is a feast to remember where we were and where God took us, right? Yeah. And to celebrate
the fingerprints of God.
That's right.
It's interesting with that, though. Going back to reversal and contrast, the early chapters. 4, there was mourning, there There was lamenting.
Sackcloth,
Confusion.
ashes,
It was
Yeah.
confusion, like that.
uproar. Yep.
And now the contrast in chapter 8 and 9, I believe,
Yeah.
we have feasting, we have gladness, we have like, so it's interesting, revert like contrast
Yeah.
to that, but also this idea of the Feast of Purim, the festival of Purim.
Purim.
It's you can say it two ways. I'll talk to a rabbi. Don't talk to a rabbi.
Fact check.
He said both of them were okay. I said, all right.
That's because you're an English speaker. I go look at the letters.
But
Oh, go ahead.
oh, no, I was going to say that's the first Jewish holiday that's actually mandated in the Bible that is not from the Torah, specifically the first 5 books of
That's
the Bible.
interesting.
Which is very interesting. And it is also not mandated by God. It's mandated by someone
Mordecai.
else, Mordecai. The other ones are mandated by God, specifically in the Torah. Just an interesting observation. So anyways, yeah. What was you going to say,
Yeah.
Russell?
No, I was going to say just the contrast I wanted to point out as well. Like you have Haman who is trying to annihilate an entire people, but then there's so many records of like his whole family being destroyed. So it's like his lineage doesn't even continue.
That's right.
So even in that,
That's right.
it's like,
Yeah.
bro, you try to stop one,
Wow. Oh, yeah,
but
yeah.
yours is
No, that's good.
done, bro. All your
Yeah.
kids gone.
Yeah,
All
no,
10 of them.
That's good.
10 of them. 20 sons gone.
Again, I feel like that's that vengeance is mine, says the Lord.
Yes.
It's like, hey, I will repay. Don't become an enemy of God.
That's right.
Yeah.
Don't do it.
Won't work out.
Some people actually look at Esther and say that maybe she was a little too harsh in that.
Really?
Yeah. I know. I was thinking about that, but I take that as I think the 10 sons of Haman came out to try to like get revenge. I mean, I think
Yeah.
I'm taking.
Yes.
And maybe I'm reading too much into it, but I feel as if like I don't think
To like avenge
If
their
you let
father.
them leave.
Yeah, it doesn't feel as if like the Jews were breaking into their enemies' homes to kill them per se.
Right.
But and again, we could talk, just get into all sort of things about how God
Yeah.
brings punishment and
right, right.
and the consequences of previous. But in this particular case, it feels to me that like they were part of the group like trying to fight the Jews, and this is what happened to them.
Gotcha. Yeah.
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 Yep.
I mean, it feels like that to me.
You know, it's interesting. Remember Gamaliel in Acts when Peter, John are coming out and he's like, yo, we've been in situations before when people tried to like cause an uprising and it fills it out. But so be careful. Like if what they're saying is true, you don't want to find yourself on the opposing side of God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Be careful.
Be careful.
I do like this idea of, remembrance. It says verse 28 that these days should be remembered and kept throughout every generation. This is verse chapter 9. In every clan, province, and city, that these days of Purim should never fall into disuse among the Jews, nor should the commemoration of these days cease among their descendants. Just how important remembering is to our faith, to our community. How do we do that well?
Enough. Yeah.
Right? I mean, we have some, the Lord's Supper is an ordinance that we have to remember Christ, right, and his death for us, and obviously Easter, things like that. But just the regular rhythm of remembering what the Lord has done for us. And I just wonder if we should make that more important and look for ways to remember in sort of even the life of
We should have
a
feasts
particular community.
to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, I wonder if that's even helpful for like, so much of this is we're feasting because we're remembering what God has done and how he's preserved his people.
Right.
I wonder if that's helpful to some of the people we know and people now who struggle with their faith.
Yeah.
I want to argue one of the reasons people struggle with their faith. So some of it is, it's very much understood. Well, I'm sympathetic. Like they've been hurt or whatever it is. But one of the things that would help them a lot is to remember the faithfulness of the Lord, the authentic examples of of who God is and God's people. And this sort of helps regularly remind you, right, that like, sure, you've went through this now in the church or from other Christians or sins that you struggled with or whatever it is. And having a regular rhythm of remembering, but God does act in the midst of pain and hurt.
Absolutely.
And remembering, maybe even not just for you, but in the examples of others and the lives of others that you're connected to, might be helpful for helping us continue to persevere and endure.
Yes. That's good.
I like, and I underlined in here, I believe it was verse 30, where it talks about like when he started sending the letters, but it was of words of peace and truth, and that kind of gives like an imagery of like what is to come, even though you're in the midst of certain things and you're going through things, but like we know in the end that there will be peace on earth, and the truth, like God, Jesus being the truth, will reign. And it's like, man, it's like this kind of like shadow of seeing like one day, it's gonna be like a calm in the sea.
It's funny too, because 10 verse 3, it's almost like Mordecai, it's almost like the book ends with that kind of note, where Mordecai the Jew was second only to the king. He was the highest ranking Jew, and he was admired by his numerous relatives. He worked enthusiastically for the good of his people and was an advocate for the welfare of all of his descendants. And so when you think about
Jesus,
when you think about the future and future peace and that future advocate, who worked for the welfare of all of his, this says descendants, but like you can talk about being admired by his numerous relatives, like the firstborn among many brethren, relatives, and advocating and understanding what they've been through. It's just interesting you say that, and then it's a great segue into that last verse.
Yeah, that's good.
It's good. Well, appreciate y'all. This was dope. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's a wrap.
I think we got a lot out of our preaching collective, and I'm excited for when the sermon series comes. As we always say, love God, love people. We are out.